He didn't wear a suit. He didn't raise his voice. And yet an entire plane stopped to listen. When 8-year-old Jalen Carter and his mother boarded Flight 348, they just wanted to get home. She carried oxygen. He carried a folder. Neither expected to be questioned, humiliated, dismissed, but when a white businessman demanded they be reseated, when the crew hesitated, and when policy became an excuse for prejudice, Jalen did something no one saw coming. He stood up, opened his folder, and quoted federal law, word for word, in front of everyone. Who is this child? Where did he learn to speak like that? And what will it cost him when the cameras start rolling and legacy calls? This is not just a story about discrimination. It's about courage, inheritance, and what happens when quiet power finally speaks. If you've ever had to fight just to be seen, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join us for this unforgettable journey. The boarding area at Gate C-18 was crowded, but Jalen Carter didn't fidget. He stood still, back straight, hands clasped in front of his hoodie. The cuffs of his sleeves were pulled slightly over his thumbs, the way he always did when he wanted to feel smaller. Less obvious, less 8 years old. His mother, Dr. Simone Carter, sat quietly beside him. She was staring out the airport window, but there wasn't much to see. Just the late afternoon sky, overcast and heavy. Their plane hadn't even pulled in yet. And still, she watched. Jalen could tell her mind wasn't really on the clouds. It was probably back in Atlanta, or maybe already ahead in Seattle. He didn't ask. They hadn't talked much since breakfast. That's how it was sometimes, these long silences that weren't angry, just tired, like the space between them wasn't distance, but weight. He glanced down at his travel bag, double-checking the folder inside. Blue, bent at the corners, and labeled in his own block handwriting, Federal Rights, Passenger Access Edition. It sat next to his inhaler and a crumpled granola wrapper. He wasn't planning on using it, not really, but after last time. After what happened on the flight with Aunt Kira and the dog crate issue, he had learned it wasn't enough to be right. You had to be prepared to prove it. Simone finally spoke. Gate changed. It was B6 this morning. Her voice was soft, controlled, the kind of calm that wasn't natural. It was practiced. Jalen nodded, but said nothing. She turned toward him slowly. You okay? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, Are you nervous to see him? Her lips parted slightly. Not in surprise, just weariness. I'm not sure if he'll even remember me, she said after a pause. Jalen looked back toward the window. They didn't talk about him often. Her father, his grandfather, a man with 3 law degrees, a national award in ethics, and, according to a 6-year-old news article Jalen had printed from his school's library, a temper so precise it could cut marble. Now, he was in a hospital in Seattle, stage 4, brain cancer, nonverbal. And suddenly, there was this urgency, this need to see him before it was too late. Simone had said it was about closure, but Jalen had overheard her crying alone in the bathroom that night. He knew it was more than that. I printed a letter, Jalen said quietly. Simone blinked. A letter in case he can't talk. She didn't ask what it said. She just nodded once, as if to say, You always think ahead, even more than I do. He wanted to tell her he hadn't written it for his grandfather. He had written it for her to read aloud, but he didn't say that either, because she was already looking back out the window. 10 minutes later, they boarded early due to Simone's medical clearance. The gate agent barely looked at them, didn't smile, didn't scan their passes with any warmth, just nodded and pointed. Simone didn't flinch. She never did. but Jalen saw the way she tightened her grip on the handle of her rollerboard, saw the way her jaw clenched, not hard, just enough. The little things. He saw them all. They walked the jet bridge in silence, the sound of their shoes echoing like hollow bells. As they stepped into the cabin, a male flight attendant greeted them. "Good afternoon," he said cheerfully, scanning their passes. "Carter, welcome aboard." He smiled at Jalen. "First time flying with us?" Jalen shook his head. "Ah, so you're a pro, huh?" Jalen didn't answer. The attendant's smile faltered slightly, then returned. "Well, let us know if you need anything." "Okay," Simone responded politely, as always, and they made their way down the aisle. Row 17, seats A and B. Jalen took the window seat. He always did. He liked the frame. The way the clouds looked like landscapes no one had touched yet. Simone settled beside him slowly, adjusting the small, discreet oxygen concentrator beneath the seat in front of her. She hated using it in public, not because of vanity, because she didn't want to be seen as fragile. She wasn't. But sometimes perception was louder than truth. And some people, especially at 30,000 feet, confused difference with danger. Jalen opened his folder, not to study, just to feel the paper between his fingers, the weight of words, the comfort of knowing the rules. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but facts made things easier, safer, more fair. He looked over at his mother, her eyes closed now. The cabin around them buzzed with overhead announcements, the thump of carry-ons, the shuffle of people trying not to bump into each other. But here, in seat 17B, she looked still, almost peaceful. And for a brief, flickering moment, he wished more than anything that this flight would just keep going. No landing, no hospital rooms, no hard words waiting behind white curtains. Just clouds, and her hand, and silence. That would be enough. It wasn't the paper that mattered. It was what it protected. Jalen's blue folder didn't have superpowers. It wasn't even new. The corners had frayed from use. The plastic pocket on the inside right had split in two places. A folded copy of the Air Carrier Access Act had nearly slipped out the last time he'd gone through security. But still he carried it, not because he expected trouble, but because he remembered what happened when they didn't expect it. That flight 2 years ago, when his mom's service letter was brushed aside by a smirking crew member. That time, a woman had whispered, "I'm just saying, it's always someone with an excuse." And no one spoke up. No one, except Jalen. He was 6 then. Now he was 8. And he had citations. He had case numbers. He had bookmarks. He had truth in print, and it was neat and crisp and laminated. Because if they were going to be seen, they would also be heard. The plane was taxiing now. The seatbelt sign lit up. The hum of acceleration grew beneath them. Simone reached down subtly to adjust the tubing connected to her concentrator. Jalen's eyes followed every movement. She caught his gaze. "You don't have to watch me, Jay," she said gently. He didn't answer. Instead, he flipped to a dog-eared page near the front of his folder and held it out to her. She looked down, then up. "Part 382, she asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded. Sub-Part E, Section 87. A small smile tugged at her lips, amused, but also sad. "You memorized it." "Page 17, he replied. "Passengers with medical devices cannot be denied boarding, delayed, or asked to move unless the equipment violates FAA safety guidelines, which yours doesn't. I measured it myself. 15 inches nose to end." Simone let out a small breath. She didn't say it, but he knew what she was thinking. "You're a child. This shouldn't be your responsibility." But then again, she hadn't raised him to wait for permission. The flight attendants moved through the cabin now, checking tray tables and confirming latches. Jalen watched them closely. He was always watching, not in a nosy way, not even curious. Exactly. It was something else, something deeper, something quiet. He needed to know who followed the rules and who bent them, because sometimes the people who broke rules were the same ones who enforced them. He'd seen it before. The badge didn't always mean fairness, and a clipboard didn't always mean competence. One of the flight attendants, a woman with straight auburn hair and tightly drawn lips, paused briefly by row 17. Her name tag said Amber. She smiled tightly at Simone. Just confirming the device was cleared in advance, Simone met her gaze. Calm and clear. Yes, with a letter from my doctor and pre-approval from your airline's medical desk. Amber nodded, slowly. Jalen saw the flicker in her expression, the same flicker people used when they didn't quite believe you, but weren't ready to say it out loud. We'll need to see that documentation after takeoff, Amber said, her voice clipped. Jalen opened the folder without a word, pulled the laminated copy out, held it up. Amber blinked. Oh, it's signed, notarized, and faxed to your Atlanta MedOps 3 days ago. Jalen said, voice even. I have the confirmation email if you need it. Would you like me to forward it now? Simone placed a gentle hand on his knee. Amber cleared her throat. That won't be necessary. For now. And then she moved on. But Jalen didn't look away until she passed the next row. Simone exhaled again, this time with a different kind of sadness. You didn't need to do that. Yes, Jalen said softly. I did. The plane lifted off minutes later. The hum became a roar, then softened into the usual cruising altitude purr. Clouds turned to mist outside the window. Jalen pressed his head against the glass. He didn't cry. He rarely did. But his chest felt tight, like the seatbelt was too low, too tight. Or maybe it wasn't the seatbelt at all. Maybe it was the feeling of being seen but not recognized, of being the kid who had to remind adults how to treat people, the one who memorized laws, because sometimes feelings weren't enough. He closed his eyes and remembered something his grandfather had written once, long ago, in a letter Simone had buried in a drawer. Justice without preparation is just hope in costume. Jalen didn't believe in costumes, but he believed in being ready, even if no one else was, especially then. The aisle never looked longer than when someone blocked your seat. Jalen stood just behind his mother, clutching his folder close to his chest. She'd stepped forward, calm, polite, unshaken, but the man in seat 17A. He didn't budge, white button down, navy blazer, a salt and pepper beard trimmed into what looked like deliberate sharpness. Everything about him said routine business traveler. Everything, except his posture. Rigid, elbows wide, legs apart. He looked up slowly from his phone, didn't smile, didn't greet them. Simone cleared her throat gently. Excuse me, this is my seat, 17A. The man didn't even blink. No, I'm pretty sure it's mine. Jalen checked again. Boarding pass? Row 17, seats A and B. Simone remained steady. I pre-booked this seat for medical reasons. It was confirmed. The man lifted one brow, clearly unimpressed. Oh, I'm sure you think that, but I've flown this route 6 times this quarter. I always request a window, so either you're mistaken. He gestured lazily toward the aisle. Or someone in booking screwed up, not my problem. Jalen felt the heat rise in his neck, not anger, something heavier. He'd seen this tone before, the way people made assumptions based on presence, before credentials, before logic, before evidence. Simone remained composed. I'm not mistaken, she said. I need the window seat to stow medical equipment safely and to avoid exposure to the aisle. I confirmed it by phone and email. Would you like me to show you? The man leaned back slowly, smirking like someone who'd already decided the conversation was beneath him. That's a lot of information for just a seat, he muttered. Jalen clutched his folder tighter. He felt it happening. That slow drip of disbelief, the kind that always started polite, then slid sideways. Before his mother could respond, a flight attendant approached. Not Amber, this time the other one. The younger man. Marcus. Everything all right here? Simone turned toward him with that same calm tone. There's been a seat misunderstanding. I'm assigned to 17A for medical accommodation. Marcus nodded and pulled out his tablet, tapping quickly. The man in the seat scoffed quietly. Look, I'm already settled. I've got a connection in Seattle. Can we not make a scene? He said the word scene the way some people say threat, as if the request was the disturbance, not the resistance. Marcus finished checking the manifest and gave a tight, respectful nod. Dr. Carter is correct. She's assigned to 17A per her accommodation request. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to switch with 17C. The man stiffened. You're reseating me over this? He gestured toward Simone, a small flick of the hand, like swatting a fly. Jalen's spine went stiff. He couldn't speak yet. He wanted to, but his body hadn't caught up. Simone stepped in, voice still calm. I'm not trying to inconvenience you. I just need the seat I was medically cleared for. The man gave a short, sharp laugh. In my experience, people like you always have needs, special treatment, last-minute changes, forms printed out in big letters. But everyone's got a reason these days, don't they? Jalen blinked slowly. There it was, the shift, not even coded anymore. People like you. He felt it like a blade behind his ribs, not because it was new, but because it was expected. Marcus tensed beside them, but kept his tone neutral. Sir, I need you to move. Now. The man huffed, yanked his briefcase out from under the seat, and stood with exaggerated slowness. You know what he said to Simone. Fine. Enjoy the view. He didn't say anything to Jalen, didn't look at him. But as he moved to the opposite side of the aisle, he muttered just loud enough for both of them to hear. Next thing you know, we'll be giving out upgrades based on sob stories. Jalen flinched. Simone didn't. She just sat down, graceful, quiet, steady, as if she'd heard it before. Because she had, too many times. When Marcus left, Jalen finally spoke. You shouldn't let people say things like that to you. Simone buckled her seatbelt. What would you have me do? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Not really. He just hated the feeling of watching, of knowing, of being powerless and prepared at the same time. She turned toward him gently. Jay, you don't have to absorb everything. He blinked. I'm documenting it. She smiled the saddest smile in the world, and somehow the most proud at 30,000 feet. Everyone looked peaceful. Sleepy heads tilted against windows. Soft snores floated through rows. Headphones whispered lullabies and jazz. Flight attendants moved slowly, like dancers trained not to disturb. But inside seat 17B, Simone Carter's chest felt like it was shrinking, not from the altitude, from the restraint. She knew how to breathe through pressure. She'd been doing it her whole life. But sometimes, even steel bends. Jalen was quiet beside her. Too quiet. He hadn't opened his blue folder in over 30 minutes. He just sat, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed out the window like the clouds might offer answers he couldn't find below. Simone reached for her water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and sipped slowly. The tightness in her hands had returned, a dull tremor, barely visible unless you knew to look. Jalen knew. He always noticed. "Jay," she said softly. "We're okay." He didn't turn. "We are," she repeated, slower this time. "The man in 17A, he's not our story." Jalen still didn't speak, just traced a slow circle on the window with his index finger. A silence settled between them. Not cold, not angry, just full. Like a room where too many memories had been left unspoken. Simone leaned back and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. Instead, memory did. 3 years earlier, a hospital room in Atlanta, fluorescent lights, bleached walls, her father's voice sharp and low. "You should have fought harder. Simone, you were too soft in that tenure hearing." "I didn't lose tenure," she replied. "I walked away." "Then you walked away from legacy." She remembered how his words sliced, how he always measured strength by resistance, never recovery, never gentleness. He was the one who'd taught her the law, but never taught her how to rest, how to heal, how to forgive herself when the world confused exhaustion for weakness. Jalen had only met him once. A brief visit, an awkward hug, no lasting imprint. Now the man lay in a Seattle hospice bed, unresponsive. And somehow, Simone still wanted his approval, still wanted him to say, "You did right by your son. You protected your name. You carried the work forward." But those words would never come. Not now. Not in time. The turbulence flickered in, just a soft jolt, a reminder that even the air could shift without warning. Jalen finally spoke. "Mom?" She opened her eyes. "Yeah." He was still facing the window, but his voice was steady. "Why do you let them say things like that?" She knew what he meant, not just them, not just today, but always. Passengers, professors, airport clerks, the people who looked at her and saw exaggeration, saw entitlement, saw trouble. She took a breath. "Because sometimes silence isn't surrender," she said. "Sometimes it's strategy." Jalen turned to face her now. His eyes didn't blink. "And when does silence stop being strategy?" he asked. "When does it just become—" Being afraid to speak, that one stung, not because it was rude, because it was true. She stared at her hands, fingers curled lightly over the fabric of her tray table. "I don't want you to grow up thinking you have to fix everything," she said, "but I do want you to notice what's broken." Jalen opened his folder, not to read, just to remind himself it was still there. "I notice," he whispered. Simone looked at him, his little jawline clenched too tightly for someone so young, his eyes too old for 8. She wanted to tell him to go back, to recess, to cartoons, to a life where folders were for spelling tests, not federal code. But she couldn't, because he didn't come from that kind of world. He came from her, and from the man lying in that hospital room, and from the silent generations who never had folders, only fear. She reached over and held his hand. Jalen didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. The clouds outside turned pink. Somewhere up ahead, the sun was setting, and beneath it, Seattle waited. Hospice, confrontation, maybe, closure, maybe. The flight had leveled out, but nothing about Simone's heart rate reflected that. She could feel it, the shift, the sideways glances, the moment things started. Tightening. It started with the tray cart. Amber, the flight attendant with the tidy auburn bun and clipped politeness, stopped beside their row, eyes glancing downward. She gestured toward the small concentrator tucked discreetly beneath the seat. "I'm going to need to take a closer look at that device." "Ma'am." Simone looked up, calm. "As I mentioned before takeoff, it's FAA approved. I pre-cleared it with your airline's medical department. You received the letter." Amber offered a tense smile. "That may be, but were receiving reports from another passenger concerned about obstruction. Jalen's eyes narrowed. He didn't need to guess who the concerned passenger was. Charles Riddell, seat 17C. Still pretending to type on his laptop like he wasn't eavesdropping, Simone gently slid her purse aside to reveal the device more fully. It's below the FAA clearance limit, less than 15 inches. Amber hesitated, then crouched inspecting the placement, glancing back at the aisle, checking her tablet. And then she said it. "I'm not sure this positioning complies with our safety standards. You may be asked to stow it elsewhere." Jalen's folder was already in his lap. Amber noticed. "Young man?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at her. He just opened the folder, flipped, paused, pulled out a printed sheet. 14 CFR paragraph 382-87. His voice was soft, clear, steady. Amber blinked. "Excuse me." Jalen handed her the sheet, highlighted, labeled, triple-checked. Simone placed a hand on his arm. "Jay, it's all right." But he continued, "This law says that passengers with approved medical equipment may not be denied the use of such equipment unless it presents a direct safety risk, as determined by documented FAA inspection. You haven't offered such documentation." Amber stood slowly. "This is airline policy." "No," Jalen replied. "This is your interpretation. Policy must yield to federal law. Section 382-87 was updated in 2020. He looked her in the eye. Not defiant. Just ready. Amber stiffened. "I'll be speaking with the captain." Simone leaned in. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Do what you need to do, but please understand we're not here to fight. We're here to fly, quietly, safely, like anyone else." Amber left without another word. The aisle fell silent. Then, whispers, across the row, behind them, phones being raised, screens glowing, recording. Minutes passed. Jalen didn't speak. Simone was still holding his hand. Only now, she was the one clinging tightly. "I didn't want it to go this way," she whispered. Jalen nodded. "I know." A few rows up, someone said, "Why does it always have to turn into something?" Another voice responded, "It's always the same story. Special rules for special people." Neither voice belonged to Charles Riddell, but Jalen didn't need names, only tone. That was enough. Amber returned. She stood straighter this time, but something in her tone had shifted. "The captain has reviewed your documentation and confirmed your equipment meets FAA standards. You may continue to use it as position." Simone nodded once. "Thank you." Amber forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jalen waited until she walked away, then leaned in and whispered she didn't apologize. Simone sighed. She doesn't have to. But she was wrong. "Yes," Simone replied, "and so were the people before her, and the ones before that." She turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "The question isn't whether people will be wrong about you. Jay, they will be. Often. The question is, what do you do with that truth?" He didn't answer. Not yet. But he looked down at his folder, and for the first time, he wasn't just holding it for her. He was holding it for himself. The silence after Amber left wasn't peace. It was pressure, thick and waiting. Jalen could feel it in his chest, in the shift of the air around them. It wasn't over. Not yet. Charles Riddell gave a theatrical sigh across the aisle, loud enough to be heard, loud enough to mean something. "Can't believe we're bending the rules for a power outlet," he muttered. Another passenger, 2 rows up, mumbled. Why doesn't she just get a note from a real doctor next time? Simone didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't even breathe differently. But Jalen did. He heard it, every word, every implication. He waited for someone else to speak, waited for Marcus, waited for decency. It didn't come, so he stood. He didn't ask permission, didn't hesitate. He rose from his seat slowly, with both feet planted firmly in the carpeted aisle, folder in hand, voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jalen said, loud enough to carry, "may I have your attention for just a moment?" The shuffle of earbuds and pages, the murmurs. A few people turned, most didn't. Simone reached out. "Jalen." He shook his head gently and kept going. "I'm 8 years old. My name is Jalen Carter. I'm traveling with my mother, Dr. Simone Carter. And I'd like to clarify something so everyone's clear about the rules you keep quoting." A beat. Then another. He unfolded the highlighted sheet, held it up, one hand shaking slightly, but not his voice. "This is a federal regulation. Title 14, Chapter 2, Subchapter D, Part 382, Section 87. It protects people like my mom, people with medical conditions, people who've done everything right and still get treated like they're asking for too much." A phone screen in row 15 lit up, recording. Jalen kept going. She submitted forms. She followed policy. She booked the correct seat. But that didn't stop someone from challenging her, from reporting her, from trying to move her. Again. He turned slightly toward Amber, who stood frozen mid-cart, eyes wide. "I know it's easier to pretend this is just about airline policy, but that's not true. It's about who you think deserves to be here, who you think is credible, who you think should be questioned first." Another silence. Thicker this time, less dismissive, more aware. "I'm only 8, Jalen said, "but I read, I research, and I know this law better than some adults in uniform." Simone's lips parted. She wasn't breathing, just watching him, a slow tear tracing her cheek. "You don't have to clap," Jalen said softly. "You don't even have to like us. But you do have to respect the law. And if you can't do that, then maybe you're the one who needs to be reseated." A gasp, a ripple of murmurs. Somewhere in first class, someone stood. But Jalen sat back down, not for applause, not for attention. He was done. He had said what he needed to say. The truth didn't need a spotlight, only a microphone. And sometimes courage came in the shape of an 8-year-old boy with a plastic folder and a voice no one expected. The plane was quiet. Not the usual kind of quiet where passengers slept or drifted into podcasts. This was the kind of silence that came after a truth had been spoken. A silence full of weight, full of witness, full of questions no one wanted to admit they were asking themselves. Simone sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes forward, back straight. Her son, the boy who had just quoted federal code to a plane full of strangers, was sitting beside her as if nothing had happened. He was quietly folding his paper again, placing it back in the blue folder, as if it were just homework, as if that moment had been normal. "Jalen," she whispered. He didn't answer, not right away. She leaned closer, not to scold him, not even to praise him, just to check if he was okay. But Jalen beat her to it. "I didn't want to embarrass you," he said. His voice was small again, not broken, just younger. "You didn't," she whispered. "You protected me." Jalen finally looked up at her, his eyes full of something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not even pride. Resolve. "I was scared," he admitted, "but I was more scared of what would happen if I stayed quiet." Simone exhaled, a long, slow breath she hadn't known she'd been holding since the gate in Atlanta. The woman across the aisle, in row 18, leaned over. She had silver hair and kind eyes. She'd been silent the entire flight until now. "Your son," she said softly, "is remarkable." Simone offered a small smile, not out of politeness, out of something deeper. Gratitude, and maybe relief. But it didn't end there, because 2 rows up, another woman, this one younger, headphones half off, turned slightly and said, "Honestly, I feel like I needed to hear that more than I realized." And then a man near the emergency exit stood, walked toward the back galley, and paused just long enough to meet Simone's eyes. He nodded once. No words. Just acknowledgement. And for the first time in hours, Simone felt the cabin tilt toward her instead of away. Not fully, not unanimously, but enough. Enough to remind her that sometimes the smallest voice resets the compass. Jalen leaned against her shoulder. He didn't say anything more, but she could feel it. The energy in his body, not anxiety, not regret, just return. Like something had left him during that speech, and something better had moved in to take its place. Marcus approached a few minutes later. He crouched slightly, so he wasn't towering over them. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "That was important." Jalen gave a little nod, barely lifting his head. Marcus looked at Simone. "Is there anything I can get you? Water, something warm?" Simone hesitated, then said, "Some hot tea would be lovely." Marcus smiled, coming right up. When he left, Simone looked back out the window. The sun was beginning to set. The clouds were touched with gold, soft, still, sacred. She remembered something her father used to say before he walked into court. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be allowed in the room. Maybe Jalen had never met the man properly, but somehow he had inherited that line. And now, for the first time in her adult life, Simone wondered, what if the legacy she thought had died in Seattle was actually sitting beside her, alive and breathing in row 17? Maybe justice didn't skip a generation. Maybe it just changed form. From thunder to whisper, from a raised fist to a boy with a folder. And that thought, that quiet, aching thought, brought tears to her eyes, but not the kind that came from pain, the kind that only arrived when your heart was finally seen. The scream didn't come from the front. It came from the back row 27, one row past the engines. At first, it was a sound no one understood, a sharp exhale, then a thud, then silence. Passengers twisted in their seats. Heads turned. Voices rose. "Someone call the crew. I think he passed out. Is he breathing?" Simone shot upright. Her instincts outraced her fear. Jalen looked up, his mind already moving fast, focused, filing pieces of chaos like puzzle parts. Marcus was there in seconds. So was Amber. "Sir, can you hear me, sir? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." But the man in 27D didn't move, didn't blink, didn't respond. Simone unbuckled her seatbelt. So did Jalen. "Mom, stay here." "Jay," she said quickly. She moved fast down the aisle, calm but urgent. "I'm a physician," she said to Marcus. "Internal medicine and pulmonary. Let me help." He stepped aside instantly. Amber hesitated, then nodded. The man slumped in the seat was pale, clammy, shallow breaths, neck vein pulsing hard. Simone pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. No radial pulse. She turned to Amber. "I need the AED and supplemental oxygen now." Jalen had followed her, not all the way down, but far enough to see, far enough to remember. He'd seen this before. Not here, not on a plane, but at home, 2 years ago. His grandfather, the way his hands had trembled, the way the ambulance was late, too late. And now, the same helplessness wrapped itself around Jalen's chest like a seatbelt he couldn't unbuckle. He looked up and saw Charles Riddell in 17C, still seated, still watching, and for the first time, he looked unsure, smaller, powerless. Amber returned with the AED. Marcus brought the oxygen tank. Simone worked quickly, cords, pads, Mask. Her hands didn't shake. Pulse is weak, she said. Respiration irregular. Could be a cardiac arrhythmia. Possibly V-fib. She turned to Marcus. We may need to divert if this doesn't stabilize. He nodded and stepped away to call the cockpit. Jalen stepped forward, holding out the laminated copy of the emergency protocol from his folder. Just in case, he whispered. Simone paused. Her eyes met his. And for the first time all day, she leaned on him, not out of weakness, out of trust. The oxygen started flowing. The man's color began to return. His fingers twitched. Simone sighed, still working, still focused, but somewhere inside, relief. The crew gathered. Amber stepped back. Passengers watched silently, some recording, some praying. Jalen stood in the aisle, not in the way, not intruding, just steady. A quiet witness to everything, a boy with a folder, and a memory of what happened when no one showed up in time. And this time he had, not as a doctor, not as a flight attendant, not as someone with power, but as someone with clarity, with presence, with truth in his hands. The man's eyes fluttered open. Simone leaned in. You're okay, sir. You fainted. We're taking care of you. He tried to speak. Failed. She squeezed his shoulder. Just breathe. Jalen stepped back. Let the grown-ups handle it now. But in his chest, a storm had passed. Not the one in the cabin. The one in him. The one that asked, what if you freeze? What if you fail? What if no one listens? And now he knew. Even if no one listens at first, you still speak. Even if they doubt you, you still show up. Because truth has its own rhythm. And courage. Its own quiet roar. They landed in Seattle 28 minutes late. The captain had opted not to divert. The man in 27D had stabilized. Still, no one stood immediately when the wheels touched down. No celebratory clap. No collective exhale. Just silence. Again. But not the same kind of silence Jalen had felt after he stood up. This one felt heavier, loaded, filtered through screens. Because now, people were scrolling. Phones buzzed. Notifications popped. And already, the comments had started. One video had captured Jalen quoting the law. Another had picked up Simone taking over mid-crisis. Another, taken from row 19, had captured Amber hesitating. Expression unreadable. And somewhere in the feed, a shaky voice had added the caption, "Kid lawyer and his mom saved a man on flight 348. Wild. But captions lie. Edits frame stories. Not always with honesty. Not always with kindness. Jalen watched quietly as someone across the aisle snuck another photo of him. They didn't ask. They didn't speak. They just took. Simone noticed. She gently closed the blue folder in his lap. You don't owe them anything, she whispered. Jalen didn't answer, because somewhere in the corner of his mind, a new question had begun forming. What if they don't see the whole story? What if they twist it? What if they think I was showing off, not standing up? His hands started fidgeting, not out of nerves, out of memory, of how quickly people forget nuance. Simone reached over, placing her palm over his. They'll say what they want, she murmured. Let them. What matters is what we remember. But Jalen didn't want just memory. He wanted clarity. He wanted protection from the narrative. And that wasn't guaranteed. As they waited for the cabin doors to open, Charles Riddell finally spoke again. To no one in particular, but loud enough for several rows to hear. Well, I'm sure he'll make a fine prosecutor one day. He's already mastered public theater. Simone turned. So did Jalen, but they didn't respond. Not yet. Because words like those don't deserve reaction. They deserve record. That was the lesson Jalen had learned first. Don't argue. document. Still, it stung. Not because it was sharp, but because it was familiar. Dismissal, discredit, distraction. Ignore him, Simone whispered. You already outgrew his entire vocabulary. A woman 2 rows back leaned forward. I'm sorry, but was that really your son, quoting law like that? Simone nodded gently. Yes, he's been studying with me since he was 5. The woman blinked, then offered a shy smile. My daughter's 9. She memorizes TikTok dances. Then she paused. I think your son is what bravery looks like now. Simone didn't reply, just nodded, because the truth was, Jalen didn't feel brave right now. He felt tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from jet lag, the kind that came from constantly proving you belonged. When the doors finally opened, Jalen held the folder tight, as if the law inside it could shield him from the way eyes now followed him down the aisle, some with admiration, some with suspicion, some with envy, all too loud, even in silence. At the gate, a man in a Navy suit approached Simone. Dr. Carter. Yes, I'm with airport operations. We've received word from corporate. The airline would like to extend an apology for any policy misunderstanding during the flight. Simone blinked. That wasn't what she expected. Jalen stepped slightly behind her, watching, listening. The man continued, and we've also been informed that certain passengers may have uploaded footage from the flight. Corporate comms is working to control the narrative, but we'd advise you to refrain from making further public statements for now. Simone tilted her head. I wasn't planning on making a statement, she replied, but thank you for the reminder that the truth can be inconvenient. The man smiled awkwardly, nodded, and left. Jalen tugged her sleeve. So now they want to control the story. She gave a tired smile. They always did. They walked toward baggage claim in silence. But this silence was different too. It wasn't about shame, or threat, or fear. It was the silence that comes before the world starts listening, even if they don't understand, even if they misunderstand on purpose. Because truth was never about being popular. It was about being consistent. And Jalen, for all his years, for all his nerves, for all his foldered facts, was now walking into a world that knew his name, not because he screamed, but because he stood. And as they turned the corner into arrivals, Simone reached for his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He squeezed back. For the first time that day, he let himself feel it. Not relief, not triumph, but something deeper. He had not failed, and more than that, he had been enough. The hospice center sat on a hill above the city, just past the blinking lights of downtown, just past the noise, past the headlines, past the stairs. Here, everything was quiet and slow. The nurse at the front desk smiled gently as Simone signed in. Room 214, second floor, end of the hallway. Jalen held her hand as they walked. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak. He understood. This was not a place for words, only presence. The hallway smelled like lemon disinfectant and something older, something like time. Worn fabric, sunlight through thin curtains. Room 214's door was cracked open, just enough to see the edge of the bed, just enough to hear the oxygen machine pulsing steady. Inside Joseph Taylor, Simone's father, Jalen's grandfather, once a fierce civil rights attorney, now barely a breath between machines. Simone paused just outside the door. Her hand trembled, but not from fear, from memory. Jalen looked up at her. You don't have to be brave, he whispered. Just be here. She squeezed his hand, then stepped inside. The room was small, not unkind, just lived in. Joseph lay still, eyes closed, skin pale, hands curled slightly at his sides. The IV dripped slowly. The monitor blinked quietly. Simone pulled a chair beside the bed. Jalen stayed standing. Didn't speak. Just watched. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she didn't correct it, didn't hide it. "I'm here. We made it." She reached for his hand, held it gently. "You were right," she said. "About the law. About how they'll always question us more. About how they'll dress it up in policy and procedure, but it's the same old fear." She laughed once. It wasn't joyful. It wasn't bitter. Just true. "But you were wrong too," she added. "You thought I had to fight the way you did. Loud, relentless, iron in your spine and smoke in your lungs." She looked at Jalen, then back at her father. "But my son, he fights differently." She gestured for Jalen to come closer. He did, slowly. "Dad," Simone whispered, "this is Jalen. You never really got to know him, but I wish you had, because he's the part of our legacy that's not bitter, not broken, just precise and patient and good." Jalen stood at the edge of the bed, awkward at first, then steady. "Hi," he said, voice soft. "I've read your cases, especially the one from 1979, the housing discrimination suit. It was brilliant." Joseph didn't stir, didn't flinch, but something in the machine's rhythm shifted slightly. Or maybe it was just the room. Simone reached into her bag, pulled out a small envelope. "I brought the letter," she said. "The one you wrote when I got tenure. The one you never sent." She opened it. The paper was yellowed at the edges. She read aloud. Only the first line. "Simone, if you're reading this, it means I failed at saying the important things in person." Her voice broke. She folded the letter and tucked it under the edge of the blanket. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say them now either. We know." Jalen stepped closer. "I used to think you had to be loud to be heard," he said. "But today, I spoke in a whisper. And somehow, the whole plane listened." The machine hummed. Outside the window, the sky was bleeding into twilight, blue becoming lavender, becoming something close to peace. Simone stood, leaned down, kissed her father's forehead. "I forgive you," she said, and meant it. Jalen placed something on the nightstand beside the bed, his folder, open to one page. The federal code he'd quoted on the plane. "Underlined, just in case," he said, smiling gently. "If you get a hearing up there." They left the room slowly, not like people escaping grief, more like people releasing it. In the hallway, Simone finally let herself cry, not out of regret, not out of anger, but because she had said what needed to be said and heard what didn't need to be spoken. Jalen didn't ask for a tissue. He just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. They didn't need words anymore. They had shared truth, and truth when spoken in love is always enough. Simone awoke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Not ringing, just humming. Persistent, urgent in the quiet way only the modern world can be. The sky outside was still gray, Seattle rain tapping against the windows like a metronome. Jalen was asleep in the other bed, arms tucked under his cheek, his folder on the nightstand beside him still closed, still sacred. Simone checked the time, 5:42 a.m. She picked up the phone. Dozens of notifications, texts, mentions, emails she hadn't subscribed to. Then came the first call. Her sister, then her old law professor, then a journalist from Washington Post. She opened the first video. It was shaky, taken from a passenger's phone. Jalen's voice, calm, clear, filled the screen, quoting law, holding the paper up, explaining federal code like a seasoned advocate. The caption read, 8-year-old black boy defends his mom on a plane, stuns everyone with his legal genius. She scrolled and scrolled, clips, comments, stitch videos with analysts praising his composure, educators saying they'd play it in class, mothers crying on camera, judges reposting the statute with breakdowns. By 6:04 a.m., the phrase boy with the folder was trending worldwide. Jalen stirred, blinking. He rubbed his eyes, confused, then sat up. "You okay?" he asked, voice groggy. Simone sat beside him. She handed him her phone, let him scroll. Silently. After a few seconds, he asked, "Is this real?" Simone smiled. "It's real." He looked up at her. "But I didn't mean for this. I know. I didn't want to be famous." "You're not," she said gently. "You're being seen. That's different." He stared at the phone a little longer, then placed it face down. "I don't know if I like it." "You don't have to," she replied, "but you do need to understand it." She paused, then added, "This is what happens when quiet power meets a noisy world. It doesn't echo back evenly." Jalen nodded, slowly. "Then will they twist it? Some will they forget tomorrow? Maybe. But will it matter?" Simone smiled. "Yes, because somewhere, another boy is watching. Somewhere, another mom is taking her first flight with oxygen, and they'll walk into that plane a little less alone." Jalen didn't say anything for a moment. Then he turned to his folder, opened it. He pulled out a sheet. It wasn't a law. It wasn't a regulation. It was a drawing. Crayon. Faded. Old. A picture he had made when he was 6. Of a courtroom, stick figures, a judge, a boy with curly hair holding a piece of paper. Simone looked at it. Her eyes welled. "You kept that," Jalen nodded. "Even when I didn't believe it would happen, I wanted to remember it could." There was a knock at the door. Soft. Simone opened it. A delivery. From downstairs, a small package. No name. No return address. She opened it slowly. Inside, a vintage copy of Joseph Taylor's landmark case, Briefs 1979, annotated. And a note. Legacy doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it wakes, it speaks in new voices. No signature. Just the initials R.B. Simone sat down. For a moment, she let herself believe that justice wasn't extinct, just dormant, until someone like Jalen walked in, quiet, prepared, unshakable. She turned to him. "You ready for the world today?" Jalen shrugged. "Not really." Then smiled. "But I think the folder is." The auditorium wasn't packed, but it was full enough. Educators, law students, mothers, pilots, and at the center of the stage, a chair. Just one. No microphone, no nameplate, just a chair and a folder. Jalen sat in it, not because he wanted to, but because he'd been asked. A local law school had invited him to speak, not as a legal expert, not as a prodigy, but as a witness, to what it means to stand your ground when the world says you're too young, too small, too black, too soft-spoken to matter. Simone sat in the front row, hands folded, face calm, but her heart still learning how to hold pride and protectiveness in the same breath. The dean gave a brief introduction, then stepped aside. Jalen looked at the audience. He didn't clear his throat, didn't shuffle. He simply opened his folder and began. On Flight 348, "I didn't know I was starting anything," he said. "I just knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." He paused. Let the silence settle. Not to manipulate, but to give the words room. My mom wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking for equal respect. And I wasn't giving a speech. I was citing the law. He held up the statute. Title 14, Part 382, Section 87, the same page, the same yellow highlight. This law protects people with medical conditions on airplanes, he said, but it didn't protect her from being questioned. It didn't protect us from being stared at, or from being recorded, or from being told by silence that we didn't belong. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. Jalen continued, I'm not here to be an exception. I'm here because I'm a reminder that when policy becomes a wall, the law becomes a window. He closed the folder, then looked out across the room. And the next time someone says you're too young, or too calm, or too unfamiliar to matter, he paused, then smiled. Let them underestimate you. That's how the truth slips in quietly and stays. The room stayed silent, not out of politeness, but out of something heavier, like reverence. Then a slow ripple of applause, not thunderous, but full, honest. Simone stood, not to clap, but to meet him at the steps. She held out her hand. He didn't hesitate. Together, they walked off the stage. A journalist approached them later, not with a question, but a request. May we publish the transcript? Jalen looked at his mom. She nodded. Only if you include the footnote, he said. The journalist blinked. What footnote? Jalen opened his folder one last time. Pulled out a handwritten page, a single line. Truth doesn't need a stage, just a witness. Not every hero wears a badge. Not every voice that matters shouts. Sometimes, justice walks in wearing sneakers, carrying a folder, and holding his mother's hand. Jalen Carter didn't just defend his mom. He defended dignity. And in doing so, he reminded us that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the breath before the truth arrives. This story wasn't about going viral. It was about going deeper, about what happens when an ordinary child with an extraordinary sense of justice faces a world that doubts his right to exist. We hope this story left something with you. A quiet tear, a deeper breath, a burning question. When it's your turn to speak, will you be ready? Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to stay with us, because we're not done telling the stories that matter. This was the boy with the folder, and the world just heard him speak.